Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Sojourning Writer. Today we're going to be discussing the book Write Tight. Say Exactly What You Mean with Precision and Power by William Brohaugh. This is one of the first books I've suggested in reading when I first began to use critique partners to improve my writing. As most new writers, we tend to struggle with wordiness, and that's even if we understand the concept at all. But today we're going to be going over a book that was written just for this issue. I will not be going over everything in this book. As always, I will be linking the book in the description as well as any other resources I use. So please check out the book for yourself and see what you can get out of it. Now let's get into the book. Write tight. Say exactly what you mean with precision and power. Intro. Whether you're writing paragraph-long anecdotes or saga running to the thousands of pages, precision and cohesion of your words, what we call writing tight, is critical to the impact of your manuscript. The need to write tight has little to do with the frequently heard whine about how little our time readers have for us poor communicators these days, how short attention spans have become, how our words compete against the synchronized bowling match on ESPN, and the war of cartoon armadillos on the latest Nintendo game. ESPN wasn't around to distract people from Hemingway in his day, yet he wrote tight. No Nintendos, no USA Today. His competition was his own standard of crisp writing. No. We write tight because, like virtue, doing so is its own reward, or at least leads us to good writing, which carries the further rewards of being accepted, paid for, and read. Yes, concise writing helps readers fit our words into their schedules, and shows respect for the readers and their precious time. But more important, tight writing makes its point, and its concision and its swiftness delivers information and impact. It is the difference between hitting with a pillow and hitting with a baseball bat. The pillow, soft and fluffy and unshaped. The baseball bat, hard, compact, and well-defined. Pillow writing is flabby and boring and wastes time. It sounds unsure, even evasive. And worst of all, it disrespects the reader and disrespects the craft of writing itself. Baseball bat writing, tight writing, shows confidence, which in turn communicates authority, is also memorable, not to mention quotable. At first, we're hesitant about the idea of pruning our own words that we use. It's so easy to believe the lie that every word we write is critical to our story, and that to cut anything out would harm our story. The reality is that when we first start writing, because we pour our hearts into our works, we start with a bias. That bias is that our writing is good. But the truth is it's not. Every great author writes, rewrites, and writes some more before the work is even complete. The author of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, rewrote the first chapter of her book, Sorcerer's Stone, 15 times. I know when I first began writing, I assumed that you just type it out and that was it. Just slap a cover on it and it was ready for print. The truth is that we as writers will most likely write and rewrite our stories many of times before it is ready for real consideration, let alone sale. With all that being said, I just want to encourage you that while the road to writing a book is long and complicated, completing it, even if it's just for yourself, is something to be proud of. Too often, we stop at the first sign of hardship, but if we push through those hard times, we will find that not only is our story better, but so are we. Chapter 2. 16 types of wordiness and how to trim them. I am lousy at yard work. I can't tell the weeds from the flowers around the house, so I let them all grow. If I could identify the weeds, tending my yard would be a lot easier. So it is with weed words. The stuff that grows so hardly in our manuscripts. The trouble is, like some weeds, these parasitic undergrowths can deceive you. They're pretty, and they don't look like weeds. Word weeds, printable leaves, and branches, whatever organic analogy you subscribe to, fall into these general categories. The redundant, the already understood, the empty, the evasive, intentional or otherwise, the passive, the weak, the noncommittal, and the hesitant. The affected, the circuitous, the self-indulgent, the overkill, the inflated and the deflated, the invisible and therefore unnecessary, the imprecise, the clever and show-offy, the nonsensical, and the beautiful. When we first start working on cutting our wordiness, we have no idea where to begin. Here, the author gives us a rough template we can use to get started. As we go through some of these 16 categories mentioned, you will be able to start looking in your own stories to see where you can start cutting. Just remember that just because you check once does not mean that you are able to spot everything in the first time. Sometimes we miss wordiness as well as other issues, only to find them when our readers point them out to us. And this is after they've been sold. It is important not to stress over being perfect, but rather work on putting in your best effort. We sometimes fall into the trap that if we don't make it extremely clear that something is happening, our readers will fail to notice it. The truth is that our readers are usually experienced in reading and already on the lookout for critical information. Now, there is opposite cases when your critique partners or beta readers are missing critical information that you need to find ways of making that information clear to the reader. This is just one of the many reasons having critique partners, as well as alpha and beta readers, is so important as a writer. The weak, non-committal, and hesitant. When we are soft about what's going on in our story, we can sometimes give our readers the impression that we are unsure about what's actually going on, that our characters aren't what they're showing them to be. Now, there are times our characters are being hesitant, but we are showing them in a way for the sake of the story. The affected. As we grow to understand how to tell stories, we can sometimes fall into this trap, that we try and show off what we've learned. The problem is that our readers can tell when we are showing off, and they are rarely impressed. If anything, they are far more annoyed. Nothing is more annoying than a know-it-all, particularly if that know-it-all doesn't know anything. There should always be a subtlety in your writing. Be present without anybody noticing. When our words speak for themselves, and there's no hint of the writer's presence, our stories are able to feel more deeply connected to the story, as well as our characters. The beautiful. Before we are writers, we should be readers. One of the greatest joys of reading is that we come across beautiful handiwork from a master. This might even have gotten us into writing in the first place. But the truth is that one of the reasons it is beautiful is because it's rare. When we try to emulate writing, particularly when we first start writing, it doesn't work out as well as we hope. And if we see that it doesn't work out, it is very likely that our readers will notice this as well. Chapter 3. Pre-writing tight. Don't worry about pre-writing tight. We've all heard that the best way to trip a centipede is to ask which leg moves first. Assuming the centipede speaks English, I suppose. Don't be a centipede at the keyboard. Don't worry about the tiny missteps at the expense of the manuscript as a whole. I find that if I'm self-conscious about my writing, the sentences and words I put on the page are longer than they would have been if I had simply gotten to work to put down the ideas instead of the words. I concoct phrasings that are deliberate, considered, and studied. Now, deliberate, considered, and studied are good in legal briefs. Flow isn't much concern in those documents. A counterintuitive aspect of the writing is that it's not an intellectual exercise, but rather it is more of a spiritual one, where the flow of the story isn't come from the higher portion of our brain, but rather comes from the instincts as a writer. As I mentioned before, writing is akin to dancing. The dancer learns and practices the art, but when it comes to the performance, they must allow their instincts to take over. To try to think through the process would end up meaning that the performer would trip over themselves rather than letting their instincts act out. Another way to think about this is the everyday action of walking. Try walking while thinking about each step. Forcing yourself to walk is similar to trying to mentally force yourself to write. It will be awkward and inefficient. Chapter 4. Testing your writing for flab. Apply the as opposed to test. Question your writing, especially your phrases, in the way I questioned the TV newscaster, using as opposed to. You write, green in color, as opposed to what? Green in height? I ran quickly, as opposed to running slowly? Only if you're a clock. It's okay to be a bit smart-aleckly about the process. If you're not, your editor will be. The office of House of Agents is in a beautiful New York brownstone. Its woodwork is rich and well-preserved, with a fine glazed tile fireplace in each agent's office. So what? Did you sign the contract or didn't you? If you can't answer so what, you could usually delete it. Another two tests we could use to screen out writing are the opposed to and the so what tests. With these, we can follow the flow of the story to help us figure out where to cut. Of course, this requires that we read our pieces with reader's eyes rather than a writer's one. The author mentions this in another portion of the book, but I will touch on it here. First, set aside the portion you're looking to look over aside for a while, whether it's a few hours or a couple days. For some, it might be that you need to continue writing and to reread the older portion after it's been a couple days. This could allow you to get the mind off the scene and help open your eyes to the issues. Another idea is to use a text-to-speech system that could read it to you. Having it read to you can change the way the story is received and allow you to hear the issues that you wouldn't normally have been able to read. Test your manuscripts for repetition. Apply the short test to big words. Joe Florin, in his Write Smarter, Not Harder, presents what he calls the sure test for big words. Is it simpler than a small word? Equivalent. For instance, beginner is simpler than tyro. Frivolous, easier than inane. Is it unique? The only way to say the idea? Many technical terms qualify, as do non-technical ones such as civilization, religion, and government. Does it add richness to your writing? Write like you talk. You must write in a way that is comfortable for you. Some of these rich personal words will be longer ones. Does it provide economy? Taking the place of several words that usually benefits the reader. Keeping things simple is even more important than just simply writing tight. If you overburden your reader, you could cause them to be very confused, if not thinking about putting down the story. Our story is not a place to show one's vocabulary. Keeping things to what they are expected can help readers become immersed. Voice is one of those things that keeps a writer coming back to the author story after story, but it is the most difficult to nail, and sometimes condensing it to the fewest possible words is better. Chapter 9. How tight is too tight? When the writing robs the manuscript of rhythm. When tight writing misdirects emphasis. When writing tight draws the form of writing away from its content. When writing reduces clarity. When writing changes meaning. When tight writing is just plain wrong. When tightening is done inconsistently. When writing tight feels longer. When tightening eliminates voice or style. When tight writing reduces the atmosphere, connections, insights, nuance, and flavor. All these elements that contribute to the richness of the writing. I would be remiss not to point out this chapter. Just like every aspect of writing, it's a balance. Just like in some ways that spell check can filter out mistakes, it can also filter out your voice for quote-unquote conciseness or simplicity. When we write too tight, we can leave out important information like our characters, plots, and world building, or the host of other things that make up the soul of our story. I have mentioned that whatever doesn't help your plot doesn't need to be in the story. While this is true for the most part, it's important that the plot isn't just the events of the primary plot points, but also how the characters are intertwined with that plot. The way your characters are acting out the plot is just as important as the element of the plot itself. Be sure that the soul of your story remains intact. In the end, there are no clear ways to be sure that you're writing as tight as possible, nor should that be the focus. To draw out the soul of your story, to unearth it from the dirt and sand of needless words or unnecessary writing elements, means that you can present the truth of your story to your readers. It's a tribute to Michelangelo concerning his marble statue. Every block of stone has a statue inside of it. It is the task of the sculptor to discover it. I saw an angel in the marble and carved until I set him free. This is true for us writers, and while we only have a blank screen or an empty piece of paper staring back at us, we too are trying to bring forth that beautiful story that hides within our own souls. So go out there and write, and then gently remove the excess to shine forth that story that only you can bring out. Okay, everybody, that's all I had for today. As always, I will be linking the resources I used in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please let me know in the comments below. Until next time, bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.